The sun had not yet risen when Maria woke up. She was lying on a cold sidewalk, wrapped in an old blanket that a kind lady had given her months ago. The blanket was worn and had several holes in it, but it was the only thing that protected her from the biting cold of Sao Paulo. Beside her, her father, Antonio, slept soundly in a makeshift bed made of cardboard boxes and torn blankets. The streets of Sao Paulo were cold and unforgiving, especially during the winter. Maria, only 15 years old, had been responsible for taking care of her father since she was 10, when he suffered an accident that left him bedridden and unable to work. Antonio had been a talented painter, known for his beautiful landscapes and portraits that captured the soul of his subjects. His hands, which had once glided gracefully over the canvases, were now weak and trembling, the result of years of disuse and his deteriorating health. Life had not been kind to them, and her mother's early death had made everything even more difficult. Maria got up silently, careful not to wake Antonio. She put on her worn clothes and tied them carefully to protect herself from the cold. She looked at her father for a moment, feeling a mixture of love and sadness. She wished she could do more for him, but her options were limited. Her routine began early, begging on the busy streets of the city center. Today would be a day like any other, Maria thought, but with the hope of earning enough to buy some food and, who knows, some medicine to ease her father's pain. With determined steps, she walked through the still dark streets, watching the first lights of dawn begin to appear on the horizon. The streets were covered in a thin layer of frost, and the icy wind made Maria shiver. She headed to a busy corner, where the hurried passers-by passed without paying much attention to the beggar girl. With a shy smile, she held out her hand, asking for help. "Please, sir, can you help me with some money? My father is sick and we need medicine." Some people ignored her, hurrying past, while others gave her small amounts of money or coins. Maria thanked everyone for their contributions with a sincere smile. Despite the hardships, she maintained a positive attitude, determined to do the best she could for her father. She had learned to read people's expressions, distinguishing between those who could help and those who deliberately avoided her. As she begged, Maria watched the city awaken. Merchants were beginning to open their shops, and the smell of fresh bread from the bakeries filled the air, making her stomach rumble. She remembered when her mother was still alive, and they had a small house and a relatively normal life. These thoughts, although painful, gave her the strength to carry on. Around noon, Maria managed to scrape together a reasonable amount of money and decided to buy a few essentials. She went to a small grocery store where the owner, a middle-aged man named Mr. Oliveira, always gave her a discount. "Good morning, Mr. Oliveira. I made a little more money today. Could you sell me some bread and milk?" Maria asked with a hopeful smile. "Of course, Maria. You are a hard-working girl. I will give you a little more bread today, for you and your father." Mr. Oliveira replied, putting some extra bread in the bag. Maria thanked him, feeling a comforting warmth in her heart. With the bag in her hands, she returned to her father, who was anxiously waiting for her. Antonio smiled when he saw her arrive, although his smile was weak and tired. "Did you get enough today, my daughter?" he asked, trying to hide the pain in his voice. "Yes, father. I brought bread and milk for us, and Mr. Oliveira gave me a little more today," Maria replied, sitting next to him and starting to share the food. While they ate, Maria told him about the people she had met that day, trying to keep her spirits high. Antonio, despite his condition, listened attentively and gave wise advice to his daughter. He felt deeply proud of Maria, admiring her strength and determination. As the day drew to a close, Maria and Antonio prepared for another cold night on the streets. Maria tucked the blankets around her father, making sure he was as comfortable as possible. She lay down next to him, holding his hand. "Good night, father. Tomorrow will be a better day. I promise," Maria said, closing her eyes and trying to push away her dark thoughts. "Good night, my daughter." "I'm sure it will be," Antonio replied, his voice choked with emotion. And so, father and daughter fell asleep, embraced by the hope of a brighter tomorrow, even in the face of the adversities they faced daily. The streets of Sao Paulo were covered in a thin layer of frost, and the biting wind made Maria shiver. She woke up early, as usual, and prepared herself for the night. Eppered for another day of begging. She wrapped herself in her worn-out clothes and tied a scarf around her neck to protect herself from the cold. Winter in the city was especially cruel to the homeless, and Maria felt every gust of wind like sharp knives cutting through her skin. After making sure her father was well wrapped in his blankets and warm, Maria left her makeshift shelter. With firm steps, she walked to the busy corner where she usually begged for alms. The sidewalks were wet and slippery, and Maria had to be careful not to slip. Her stomach growled, and she hoped to earn enough to buy some food and, if possible, some medicine to ease her father's pain. Arriving at her usual spot, Maria chose a strategic spot near a coffee shop and a bakery. The smell of fresh bread and coffee filled the air, provoking a mix of hunger and nostalgia. She remembered the times when her mother was still alive, and they had a small house with a table full of simple but delicious food. These thoughts strengthened her, giving her the determination to carry on. Maria sat on the cold, damp floor, holding out her hand with a shy smile. "Please, sir, can you help me with some money? My father is sick and we need medicine." The streets were busy as people headed to work. Some ignored her completely, looking away or rushing past. Others gave her small amounts of money or coins, and Maria thanked them for each contribution with a sincere smile. "Thank you, sir. May God bless you," she said over and over. As she begged, Maria observed the movement around her. She saw children going to school with their colorful backpacks and warm coats. She saw businessmen and women walking quickly, talking on the phone or looking at their watches. She also saw other homeless people, each with their own story of struggle and survival. The city was alive and pulsating, but for Maria, it was a constant struggle for survival. At one point, a well-dressed man stopped in front of her. He wore an expensive suit and had a serious expression on his face. Maria looked up, surprised by the attention. "Miss, what's your name?" the man asked, his tone gentler than his appearance suggested. "Maria, sir," she replied timidly. "And where's your father?" he continued, kneeling down to be at her level. "He's sick, sir. He's bedridden, and I'm trying to get some money to buy him medicine," Maria explained. Feeling a lump in her throat, the man looked at her for a moment, assessing the situation. Then he opened his wallet and took out a 50 real note, placing it in Maria's hand. "I hope this helps, Maria. Take good care of your father," he said, standing up and continuing on his way. Maria was speechless for a moment, looking at the note in her hand. It was a significant amount, and she knew it could make a difference that day. With tears in her eyes, she whispered a thank you. "Thank you, sir. May God bless you." The rest of the day was more fruitful than usual. Maria managed to save up a reasonable amount of money and decided it was time to buy some essentials. She headed to a small grocery store where the owner, a middle-aged man named Mr. Oliveira, always gave her a discount. "Good morning, Mr. Oliveira. Today I got a little more money. Could you sell me some bread and milk?" Maria asked with a hopeful smile. "Of course, Maria. You are a hard-working girl. I will give you some more bread today, for you and your father." Mr. Oliveira replied, putting some extra bread in the bag. Maria thanked him, feeling a comforting warmth in her heart. With the bag in her hands, she returned to her father, who was waiting anxiously for her. Antonio smiled when she arrived, although his smile was weak and tired. "Did you get enough today, my daughter?" he asked, trying to hide the pain in his voice. "Yes, father. I brought us bread and milk, and Mr. Oliveira gave me a little extra today," Maria replied, sitting down next to him and starting to share the food. As they ate, Maria told him about the people she had met that day, trying to keep her spirits up. Antonio, despite his condition, listened attentively and gave his daughter wise advice. He felt deeply proud of Maria, admiring her strength and determination. As the day drew to a close, Maria and Antonio prepared for another cold night on the streets. Maria arranged the blankets around her father, making sure he was as comfortable as possible. She lay down next to him, holding his hand. "Good night, father. Tomorrow will be a better day, I promise," Maria said, closing her eyes and trying to push away the dark thoughts. "Good night, my daughter. I'm sure it will be," Antonio replied, his voice choked with emotion. Thus, father and daughter fell asleep, embraced by the hope of a brighter tomorrow, even in the face of the adversities they faced daily. That cold morning began like any other for Maria. She was on her usual street corner, trying to collect a few coins from the passers-by who hurried by. With each shy smile and kind request, Maria hoped for a small act of charity that could help her and her father survive another day. The winter fog enveloped the city, making visibility limited and intensifying the feeling of cold. Maria rubbed her hands together to warm them and kept her head down, trying to avoid the icy wind that seemed to cut through her skin. She looked around, observing the people passing by, many of them wearing heavy coats and scarves, oblivious to her presence. It was then that an elegant figure stood out in the crowd. A well-dressed woman, in an expensive wool coat, stopped in front of Maria. She seemed out of place in that setting of poverty, but her gaze was one of genuine concern. "Hello, dear. What's your name?" the woman asked with a gentle smile, kneeling down to be at Maria's level. Maria, surprised by the approach, looked up to meet the woman's eyes. There was something comforting about that presence. "Maria, ma'am," the girl replied timidly. "I'm Clara," the woman said, extending her hand. "I've seen you here every day, and I admire your courage. I'd like to help in some way." Maria was a little suspicious, but the sincerity in Clara's eyes reassured her. She decided to tell her story, explaining about her father's condition and how she struggled daily to support both of them. Clara listened attentively, without interrupting, her eyes filling with compassion. "My father, Antonio, was a talented painter, but after the accident, he couldn't work anymore. My mother died when I was very young, so it's just the two of us," Maria said, her voice breaking. "I do what I can, but it's hard." Clara, moved, took Maria's hand and promised to return the next day with some provisions and warm clothes. "Maria, I'll help you. I'll come back tomorrow with some things you need," Clara said with an encouraging smile. "You're a very strong and brave girl." Maria thanked her emotionally, not knowing how to express all the gratitude she felt. It was rare to find someone who genuinely cared about her situation, and Clara's promise filled her heart with hope. The next day, Clara returned as promised. She brought with her a large bag full of groceries, warm clothes, and even some personal hygiene items. Maria was astonished to see the woman's generosity. "Here you go, Maria. I brought some things for you and your father." "I hope this helps," Clara said, handing the bag to the girl. Maria took the bag with trembling hands, unable to hold back her tears of gratitude. "Thank you so much, Clara. This means a lot to us," Maria said, her voice choked with emotion. Clara smiled and hugged Maria, feeling how much that small help meant to her. They talked for a few more minutes, and Maria told her more about her life and the challenges she faced every day. Clara listened attentively, asking questions and showing genuine interest. "Maria, I know life is hard for you, but I want you to know that you are not alone," Clara said, holding Maria's hands. "I will continue to help whenever I can." Clara's kindness and support not only provided material relief, but also strengthened Maria's spirit. She felt that, despite all the hardships, there were still good people in the world willing to help. This thought filled her with hope and renewed her determination to fight for a better future for her and her father. That night, Maria returned to the makeshift shelter with the bag full of provisions. Antonio, upon seeing the amount of things his daughter had brought, was surprised and moved. "Maria, where did all this come from?" he asked, his eyes brimming with tears. "A woman named Clara helped us, Father. She is very kind and said she will come back to help us more often," Maria replied with a radiant smile. Antonio felt a deep relief and gratitude. He knew that despite the hardships, there was still hope. They shared a warm and comfortable meal, something rare in those circumstances, and slept with their hearts a little lighter. That cold night, as the lights of the city shone in the distance, Maria and Antonio fell asleep embraced by the new hope that Clara had brought into their lives. The unexpected help from a kind stranger had made all the difference, reminding them that even in the most difficult situations, human kindness could be a source of light and warmth. The morning sun filtered through the cracks in the buildings, casting a warm glow. Soft light fell over the still silent streets. Maria, as usual, was by her father's side, preparing to face another day of challenges. After Clara's unexpected help, she felt a little stronger. but she knew that the daily struggle continued. Maria woke up early, arranged the blankets around her father to make sure he was warm, and went out to the corner where she usually begged for alms. The city was still waking up, and the cold morning air made her hug her arms around her body, trying to keep warm. When she reached the corner, Maria chose her usual spot, near the coffee shop and the bakery, and began her routine of asking for help. People hurried past, some throwing coins in her direction, others simply ignoring her presence. However, that morning, something different caught Maria's attention. In the middle of the crowd, she saw a familiar figure. Her father, Antonio, walking with firm and determined steps. Maria blinked several times, thinking that her eyes were playing tricks on her. But no, it was really him. Antonio was standing, walking, without the signs of pain he usually showed. "Dad?" Maria murmured in disbelief. She quickly stood up and began to follow him. Her heart was beating fast in her chest, a mix of confusion and hope. How could her father, who could barely move, be walking so normally? And where was he going? Maria followed Antonio through the busy streets, keeping a safe distance so as not to be seen. He walked with purpose, without looking back, as if he knew exactly where he was going. After a few minutes, Antonio arrived at a luxury hotel, one of the most expensive in the city. Maria watched, hidden behind a lamppost, as he entered through the hotel's revolving doors. "What's going on?" Maria whispered to herself. She knew she had to find out the truth. With cautious steps, she approached the hotel entrance, trying to appear as inconspicuous as possible. The hotel's glass doors swung open automatically as she approached, revealing an opulent lobby with crystal chandeliers and gleaming marble floors. Maria felt out of place, her torn clothes a stark contrast to the luxury around her. She spotted Antonio in the distance, talking to a well-dressed man at the front desk. She decided to hide behind a large ornamental plant, trying to listen in on the conversation. "Mr. Antonio, your suite is ready. Is there anything else you'd like?" The receptionist asked with a polite smile. "No, thank you. Just send the mail to my room as usual," Antonio replied, in an authoritative and confident tone Maria had never heard before. She froze, trying to process what she had just heard. Suite? Mail? Who was that man, and what was he doing with her father? Maria waited until Antonio and the receptionist were out of sight before approaching the desk. "Excuse me, miss. How can I help you?" asked a young receptionist, smiling at Maria. Maria hesitated, but knew she needed to find out more. I was looking for a man I saw come in here. His name is Antonio," she said, trying to sound confident. The receptionist looked Maria up and down, clearly surprised by the question. "Mr. Antonio?" "Yes, he is one of our oldest guests. What do you need from him?" asked the receptionist, intrigued. Maria was speechless. "Old guest?" Nothing made sense. "I am his daughter," Maria revealed, her voice trembling. "I need to talk to him. It's urgent." The receptionist frowned, but nodded. "I'll call the manager. Maybe he can help you," she said, leaving to get the manager. As she waited, Maria felt lost. How could her father, who she believed to be a simple and frail man, be staying in a luxury hotel? And why had he never told her anything? The manager, a tall, gray-haired man, appeared a few minutes later. He looked worried and curious at the same time. "Hello, my name is Paolo. I am the hotel manager. How can I help you?" he asked, his gaze searching. Maria took a deep breath and told her story, from her father's accident to the daily struggle on the streets. Paolo listened attentively, without interrupting, his eyes revealing a mixture of surprise and compassion. "That is surprising," Paolo said finally. "I have known Mr. Antonio for years, and he has always been a very private man. He has never mentioned having a daughter. I will take her to him, but please understand that this may come as a shock to him as well." Maria nodded, following Paolo through the hotel. They took the elevator up to the top floor, where the most luxurious suites were located. Paolo stopped in front of a door and knocked softly. "Mr. Antonio, there is someone here who wants to see you," Paolo announced. The door opened slowly, and Antonio opened it. He looked, his expression changing from confusion to shock when he saw Maria. "Maria? What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice shaking. "Father, I saw you come in here. What's going on? Why are you walking? And why are you staying in this hotel?" Maria asked, tears streaming down her face. Antonio sighed, knowing he could no longer hide the truth. He motioned for her to come in, and Paolo discreetly withdrew, closing the door behind him. Inside the luxurious suite, Maria sat on the couch, looking around in disbelief. Antonio sat beside her, holding her hands. "I'm so sorry for deceiving you, Maria. I never wanted you to find out like this." Antonio began, his eyes full of remorse. "Father, what's going on?" Maria asked, her voice full of pain. Antonio took a deep breath, preparing himself to reveal the truth he had kept for so long. "A long time ago, before you were born, I had a very different life. I was a wealthy man, involved in businesses that, at the time, I thought were legitimate. But over time, I discovered that there was a lot of corruption and illegality. I tried to leave, but it was difficult. When your mother became pregnant with you, I decided I needed to protect you. We faked an accident, and I started living a simple life to keep you safe," he explained, tears streaming down his face. Maria was silent, trying to process the revelation. She felt betrayed and confused, but at the same time, she was beginning to understand the sacrifices her father had made for her. "Dad, why didn't you ever tell me?" she asked, her voice breaking. "I wanted to protect you. I wanted you to have a normal life, away from the dangers I faced. But now, I see that I ended up hurting you in another way," said Antonio, hugging Maria. Maria cried in her father's arms, feeling a mixture of relief and sadness. The truth had finally been revealed, and although there were still many questions, she knew that they would face everything together. That night, as she gazed at the city lights from the top of her hotel suite, Maria felt a new hope rise in her heart. She knew the journey would not be easy, but with the truth finally exposed, father and daughter could begin to rebuild their lives and face the challenges together. The next day, as promised, Clara returned with supplies and clothes for Maria. The girl thanked her emotionally, but she couldn't get the sight of her father at the hotel out of her head. She decided to tell Clara about what she had seen. "Clara, I need to tell you something. Yesterday, I saw my father entering a luxury hotel. I don't understand how that's possible," Maria said, her eyes full of doubt. Clara was surprised, but she believed in the girl's sincerity. She promised to help her find out what was happening, suggesting that they both go to the Majestic Hotel to investigate. When they arrived at the Majestic Hotel, Clara used her charisma and influence to get information about Antonio. They discovered that he was registered at the hotel under another name, and that he had received frequent visits from a mysterious man. "Who could this person be, and why is your father pretending to be someone else?" Clara asked, intrigued. Maria didn't know how to answer, but she was determined to find out the truth. What else was her father hiding from her? The questions multiplied in her mind, but she knew that she would only find answers if she kept investigating. In the following days, Maria and Clara continued to follow the clues left by Antonio. They discovered that the mysterious man who visited her father was an old co-worker, Roberto, also a painter. Roberto revealed that he and Antonio had been involved in a clandestine art project, financed by an influential figure in the city. Antonio had accepted the proposal to guarantee a better future for Maria, but the project had gone wrong, resulting in an accident that left Antonio bedridden. To protect Maria, he hid the truth, maintaining the facade of a sick and poor father. With the help of Clara and Roberto, Maria finally confronted her father. Antonio, weakened and emotionally shaken, confessed everything. He didn't want Maria to know about his involvement in something illegal and dangerous. But now, the truth was out and Maria felt betrayed. But she also understood her father's motives. "I did this for you, my daughter. I wanted to give you a better future, but I failed miserably," Antonio said, tears in his eyes. Faced with the truth, Maria made a courageous decision. She forgave her father and decided that, together, they would find a way to start over. Clara offered financial help and a place for them to stay while Antonio recovered. Maria knew the road would be long and difficult, but with the help of Clara and Roberto, she was determined to build a better future for both of them. Her resilience and courage would carry her through the challenges ahead. and she was ready to face whatever came her way. With the support of Clara and Roberto, Maria and Antonio began a new journey. Clara helped Antonio obtain proper medical treatment, and Roberto offered art lessons to Maria, who demonstrated a natural talent for painting. Together, they formed a new family, united by love and determination to overcome adversity. Maria's life, which had previously been marked by poverty and suffering, was now filled with hope and new possibilities.